The European Union is one of the world's most influential international organizations. For years, its union has driven initiatives that have expanded its interests and global reach, with its influence being undeniable. However, its future now hangs in the balance, caught between crisis and potential transformation. The war in Ukraine, already a significant geopolitical upheaval, is just the beginning. Combined with a brewing financial storm and an escalating existential crisis, Europe is facing unprecedented challenges that could fundamentally alter its structure. Like most international organizations, the European Union's member states retain their sovereignty, able to act independently. But what if this were to change? What if, instead of a union of sovereign states, the European Union evolved into a federation? While this may seem improbable, could the financial demands of supporting Ukraine become the catalyst that forges a truly federal European Union? To understand what's at stake, let's rewind to a pivotal moment in European history, the coronavirus pandemic. In 2020, as the world plunged into a severe economic downturn, the European Union faced an unprecedented challenge. The economic fallout from the pandemic left many member states grappling with a crisis of historic proportions. Instead of relying on individual nations to shoulder the burden, the European Union borrowed 650 billion euros from international financial markets. This borrowing was part of the Next Generation European Union Fund, a plan designed to help struggling countries recover from the pandemic's devastating impact on their economies. The fund was a bold attempt to demonstrate solidarity across the Union, offering financial support where it was needed most. But here's the interesting part. This wasn't just a loan to be repaid by member states. The European Union took on the debt directly. Fast forward to today, and the European Union is facing an even bigger challenge: how to repay that debt. Member states can't afford massive increases in contributions, and taxing multinationals or imposing new tariffs has faced stiff opposition. The current budget negotiations for 2028 are heating up, and the clock is ticking. The stakes? Well, the European Union's entire budget for 2025 is less than 200 billion euros, while the recovery debt has already exceeded 300 billion euros, with another 350 billion euros still owed in grants. But this is just the beginning. A new storm is brewing on Europe's eastern frontier. The ongoing war in Ukraine has triggered a significant shift in European politics, and the ripple effects are being felt far beyond the battlefield. With the United States signaling its desire to withdraw from its role as Europe's primary security guarantor, the European Union finds itself facing a stark reality. If it wants to remain a global power, it must take responsibility for its home defense. But here's the problem. Ensuring Ukraine's security without American help is an astronomical financial commitment. The numbers are staggering, up to 3 trillion euros over the next decade, including the cost of deploying a peacekeeping force of 100,000 troops and bolstering Europe's national militaries. This is not just a small bump in the road for European Union economies. It's a financial behemoth that could overwhelm even the wealthiest member states. The European Union, already burdened with debt from the coronavirus recovery, is facing the prospect of borrowing trillions more. This is where history offers a fascinating lens through which to view Europe's current predicament. Back in the late 18th century, the fledgling United States faced a similar crisis. The Articles of Confederation, which governed the early U.S., were ineffective in managing the national debt and the country's defense needs. The Continental Congress was unable to levy taxes, and as a result, the nation struggled to pay off war debts. Faced with the prospect of collapse, the U.S. created a new system, the Constitution, and with it, the establishment of a federal government with the power to tax, borrow, and regulate. The result? A stronger, more unified nation. Again, looking back at history, crises often lead to greater integration. After World War I, Germany became a more centralized state after struggling to manage its finances in a fragmented system. Similarly, the European Union has evolved step by step towards closer union following each crisis it faced. whether it was the financial crash of 2008 or the migrant crisis in 2015. Could Europe follow a similar path? The European Union's current structure is fragile, with member states holding tight to their national sovereignty. But as the financial burden of the Ukraine crisis mounts, could the European Union be forced into a similar evolution? Could the need for financial cohesion and a unified defense system push Europe towards a more centralized federal structure? The current combination of financial uncertainty and the looming threat in Ukraine might just be the push the European Union needs to move closer to a federal system. Federalism could give the European Union more control over defense, economic policies, and, importantly, taxation, which in turn could help it manage these massive financial burdens. Europe is standing on a precipice. Some argue that the European Union is on the verge of a major transformation, a shift towards pragmatic federalism. This would involve amending the European Union's treaties to grant the Union the power to raise taxes and borrow more freely, creating a more centralized political and financial structure. In this scenario, the European Union could tap into its own resources to pay off its massive debts and fund a new European defense force. But this is no simple task. The political resistance from member states is significant. Many are fiercely protective of their national sovereignty and wary of ceding power to Brussels. Furthermore, treaty changes require unanimous consent, and with so many diverging interests, this could prove to be a monumental hurdle. Still, history tells us that in times of crisis, nations often find themselves compromising on old principles in the name of survival. The alternative? Fragmentation. If the European Union fails to adapt and strengthen its central institutions, it risks falling apart at the seams. The strains of debt, economic inequality, and geopolitical insecurity could lead to a breakdown of unity, with member states choosing isolation over collaboration. The European Union could become less of a cohesive bloc and more of a loose confederation, unable to act decisively in the face of global challenges. A federal European Union would take charge of defense and foreign policy, independent of the US or any other external actor. With the threat of global instability and increasing pressure on Europe's security, having the European Union lead its own defense initiatives would allow the Union to move faster, speak with one voice, and make decisions that reflect the common interests of its members. The European Union could maintain a standing, well-funded military force, much like NATO, but tailored to European needs and priorities, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. This kind of system would still allow for significant autonomy for each member state. Countries would retain their own political structures, their domestic sovereignty, and control over internal affairs like education, healthcare, and justice systems. But at the same time, they would agree to a more structured, coordinated approach on matters that affect the entire continent, particularly when facing shared crises or global challenges. The Union would become a more unified entity, making long-term strategic decisions on issues such as climate change, technological innovation, and economic growth, issues that transcend national borders and require cooperative effort. If European Union countries were asked to become a federation, reactions would likely be mixed, reflecting the diversity of political landscapes and national interests across the continent. Some countries, particularly those that are more supportive of European integration, such as France and Germany, may welcome the idea of a stronger, unified union that could tackle global challenges like defense, security, and economic crisis more effectively. These nations may see it as a natural progression toward a more stable and influential Europe. However, many countries, particularly those with a strong sense of national identity or those that have been more cautious about ceding power to Brussels, could resist such a move. Nations like Hungary, Poland, and smaller states with more Eurosceptic views might worry about losing sovereignty and control over key areas like fiscal policy, immigration, or defense. Public opinion in these countries may also lean against the idea, fearing that federalism could diminish their ability to make independent decisions. While a federal European Union may seem like a distant possibility, the building blocks are already in place. Current trends suggest that the European Union is already moving towards more centralized financial management. The introduction of joint borrowing for the Coronavirus Recovery Fund was an important step in this direction. With national governments unable to meet the scale of the crisis on their own, the European Union took it upon itself to borrow the money needed to support member states, marking a historical shift in how the European Union functions. If the European Union continues down this path, borrowing funds for purposes like defense or technological innovation could become the norm. And as the European Union develops more financial tools, the idea of a unified tax system becomes more plausible. The political and economic dynamics of the region are evolving, creating the right environment for such a transformation to take place. Moreover, as we've seen with the Ukraine crisis, the European Union has already had to confront issues that require deep coordination and long-term planning. The ongoing conflict has highlighted the need for European self-reliance in matters of security and defense. European nations have been thrust into a position where they can no longer rely solely on the United States for military backing. This is a wake-up call for Europe to consider its own defense strategy, one that doesn't depend on external influence. With the increased strain on European national budgets and the mounting costs of defending Ukraine and maintaining internal security, the European Union is being forced to think beyond its current limitations. This crisis could very well be the catalyst that accelerates the push towards a federal union, just as past global conflicts and economic crises have done for other nations. The urgency created by the Ukraine crisis could force member states to abandon their resistance to centralization, pushing them to adopt a more unified stance on issues that require immediate and long-term action. With the U.S. retreating from its role as Europe's primary security provider, the European Union will need a more cohesive strategy and the financial and military tools to back it up. In this context, federalism becomes not just an option, it could become a necessity. In the future, European citizens could see an European Union that is more empowered, more unified, and more capable of managing its own affairs. Rather than 27 voices speaking on behalf of their respective nations, Europe could speak with a single voice in global matters, able to act swiftly and decisively. As Europe continues to grapple with crises like Ukraine, climate change, and economic instability, the movement toward federalism may just be the next logical step. Could the European Union, once a loose confederation of sovereign nations, evolve into a true federal union? Your perspective matters. What do you make of the EU becoming a federal union? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments section below. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to Current Affairs channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our informative future videos. Stay informed, stay engaged, and thank you for watching.